بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين وبعد. So Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought us now to the fifth juz'. And in the fifth juz', we see some of the themes continue from the fourth juz', from the beginning of Surah An-Nisa, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's talking about protecting the sanctity of the nuclear family, because the nuclear family is what is the institution that protects the continuity of the species. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He wants our species to continue, and He wants it to continue in the best of ways. And so we're talking about the interpersonal relationships. How do we protect ourselves from misguiding our own selves and deviating as a community by oppressing each other and allowing each other to fail? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives us the surah in order to deal with that and address the main issues that need to be kept in mind when building community and trying to preserve community. And so we had talked about the orphan briefly, but here in the beginning of Juz 5, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's talking about safeguarding wealth. So this is one of the first things that we see. We were talking about safeguarding the sanctity of women's reputations, but now we're part of that conversation goes to the honor and dignity that comes with making sure that women's wealth and finances are protected and maintained. And so one of the things that we find is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislates dowries for women, where He says, فَمَا اسْتَمْتَعْتُمْ بِهِ مِنْهُنْ فَآتُوهُنَّ أُجُورَهُنَّ فَرِيضَةً. And so as men, we have the natural advantage as men because we have the physical. Generally speaking, we're supposed to have the physical advantage of dominance. And so therefore, the protections aren't necessarily for us. Therefore, the people who are liable, who are exposed to the oppression that can come from people with more power. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He puts these checks and balances in place to make sure that other people can keep these people in check and make sure that everything is going according to a just plan. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, part of the protection that He gives is making sure that men are giving dowries to women, especially the women that they have intimacy with, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sanctioned them to have intimacy with. He hasn't sanctioned, if He hasn't sanctioned it, if it's not marriage, then that's a whole nother conversation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not protect those kind of relationships with the law. As a matter of fact, He tries to prevent those relationships from happening through the law. But for us, and through the guidance that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has given. But when it comes to marriage, we should enter into marriage, bringing that financial security into the marriage itself. And so this is part of that safeguarding. Another part of safeguarding is the preservation of the children's wealth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about He talks about safeguarding the children's wealth when He says, وَلِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا مَوَالِيَ مِمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ وَالْأَقْرَبُونَ وَالَّذِينَ عَقَدَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ فَآتُوهُمْ نَصِيبَهُم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about basically, when it comes to inheritance, and we talked about inheritance before in the beginning of the surah, protecting that inheritance, to protecting the wealth that's being left behind for the people who come after them. This wealth is supposed to be protected as well. So just because the original person who had the wealth is no longer there, that doesn't mean it's up for grabs. That doesn't mean it's up to the most powerful person to take it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He manages that and He gives us laws for that, so no one can claim rights upon that and take the rights from other people. And so He also teaches us to avoid fraud and avoid finding ways to take wealth from people in a way that's not sanctioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of how we deal with people. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, la ta'kulu amwalakum bainakum bil batil. He says, oh, you who believe, don't consume each other's wealth in a form of falsehood. Don't do it with on false pretenses or using false means or or unsanctioned means in order to gain a person's wealth. And all of this comes from jealousy, comes from wanting to harbor material gain and thinking that someone has an advantage over you if you don't have what they have. And so you're willing, a person will be willing to go to the extreme to take that person's wealth from them. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, or he says, um, وَلَا تَتَمَنَّوْا مَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بِهِ بَعْضَكُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. Don't wish for the wealth that other people have. لِلرِّجَالِ, like for example, men have what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for men to have. Women have what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for women to have. Naturally, whatever they're naturally gifted with, as well as the laws that are also given to them. And so don't try to take one from don't try to switch them around or try to take one from the other. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done that for a reason. There's a wisdom behind it. There's a benefit behind it. Focus on applying it holistically so everyone can benefit. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he moves from there and starts talking about safeguarding guidance itself, not just safeguarding wealth. Well, part of safeguarding wealth, you need to have guidance in order, and you need to safeguard that guidance in order to avoid falling into the pitfalls of the people before us. And so how do we preserve our wealth? Or how do we preserve our guidance? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, number one, tawheed, making sure that we're not worshiping anyone other than Allah. That was the main mistake of all the nations before us. That's how it started. It started off with some form of shirk, and then not resisting, because once you do that, you resist any other type of morality, because now you have your own morality that you just put on the idol or whatever thing you worship. You could be worshiping, you're basically worshiping yourself, but you're saying it's an idol, or you're saying this is a man, or you're saying whatever it is, and now you're projecting your own feelings onto that thing, and then that thing now is supposed to create the laws for you. Basically, those are just a reflection of your own desires. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tawheed. So number one, we have to preserve our belief. We also have to preserve our minds. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la taqrabu as-salata wa antum sukara. One of the problems with the human mind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created it to behold the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to process it, and to be able to process it in a way where we can improve society, where we can process it and then do things that we need to do in society to improve it. But when our minds are not functioning the way they're supposed to function, our minds can be fragile if we're not using them properly, or we're exposing it to things that are counterintuitive to its functions. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he protects us from that by saying, don't drink. And this was this is one of several of the rules that came in a progression of prohibiting alcohol. And so we have to protect our minds in order to behold the guidance, and in order to process it well and not be under any other influences. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he protects our minds, and by protecting our minds, we're also protecting guidance as well. And also protecting our salat, and protecting our sacred spaces. La taqrabu salata wa antum sukara. So don't enter into salat. Don't even get near salat. Don't go into the masjid. Don't pray. Like, don't do these things while under the influence. But so you have the influence, but then you also have just the whole point is to preserve the human being, but also to preserve the sacred things in the religion, and particularly preserving the book and the Quran. Because what happens, and this is one of the contexts for this ayah, is that person got drunk and they start saying, "Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun a'budu ma ta'budun." They would say, this isn't even Quran. I mean, he was just mumbling, he was jumbling everything around. He was saying, say to the disbelievers, I worship what you worship, and you worship what I worship. And he's just messing it all the way up because his mind was wrong. And so now you're messing up the guidance itself, right? And so minds have to be right, and we have to preserve the actual Quran itself and make sure that it's being passed on properly. And so we have safeguarding wealth, and we safeguard guidance. Now, in order to do that, in order to safeguard the wealth, in order to safeguard guidance, rules have to be upheld. How do you uphold guidance? How do you uphold wealth? You uphold it through good governance, righteous governance. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he talks about this in another part of the juz. He says, Inna Allah ya'murukum an tu'addu al-amanati ila ahliha. Allah commands you to deliver or to serve the trust, the amana, this trust that he's given people, and so give people their rights, basically, right? A person's right is a trust. Like, for example, when children have particular rights, that's a trust. Now, those rights have to be given. Who gives them? The parent's supposed to give them. That's a trust that's on the parent. The same thing with good governance. So the person who's in a position of leadership, they're supposed to deliver the rights of the people, right? And that's their trust that they have to deliver. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's telling us that we need to preserve righteous leadership, because only righteous leadership will have the moral fortitude and wisdom to deliver the rights of the people properly, and we have to protect that. And so he talks about these things, and in each of these cases, we'll see when you read through the juz', you'll also find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about other, like what happens to or what people would say to try to undermine that, or what the people of the book have done in the past, or what they're currently doing now. This is an example of what not to do, right? For example, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ يَزْعُمُونَ أَنَّهُمْ آمَنُوا بِمَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكَ وَمَا أُنزِلَ مِنْ قَبْلِكَ يُرِيدُونَ أَن يَتَحَاكَمُوا إِلَى الطَّاغُوتِ. Right? Don't you see the people who claim to believe in what you have, what was revealed to you, meaning Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or what was revealed to what came before you. But they want some false form of governance. They want some false form of law giving. Like when they have a dispute and they come to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they don't want, they don't want the truth to be told to them. They just want some other form. It's the same thing as during the time or during the first juz, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he told them to slaughter a cow, right? And you go back to that surah and see what they did. They were trying to find every other way, any other answer but that one, right? Again, this is an approach to justice. This is the wrong approach, right? We should trust the guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, that is going to deliver the rights to the people who deserve it. And that's good for everyone. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he talks about, so these are examples where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us, different examples of what not to do. And then he also gives us examples of what the right principle is. For example, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. We have not sent a messenger except to be obeyed. So this is part of righteous governance and following righteous governance. Now, obviously, when it comes to if we're trying to preserve people's wealth and make sure that they have the wealth that they're supposed to have, if we're trying to preserve people's guidance and make sure that their minds and their souls are preserved and safeguarded from being tampered with, if we're also trying to preserve justice in the land by having righteous governance, then obviously we have to also preserve our own lives. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts people in a position where they have to defend themselves, someone's trying to, they're not even focused on their mind or their guidance or these things. We just want to kill you. We want what you have, so on and so forth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also legislated fighting as well, so that people can be able to defend their right to live, to defend their right to have freedom of religion, to defend their right to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to defend their wealth and their possessions. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, and so he talks about this right, and he talks about how we're supposed to maintain a balance. So one of the things that he knows is that violence can become something that is driven by anger and revenge. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives all these kind of rulings as to, like, okay, well, if this person is killed, or if there's, even if it was an accident, like someone kills someone by accident, like like a hunting accident or something like that, all of these things have to be taken into account, because the opposite end would want revenge, for example. So for example, someone's killed even by accident, maybe the brother of the victim or maybe the father of the victim, or maybe the friend of the victim, or particularly the family members in particular here, would they might want some form of compensation for this, as opposed to, oh, it was just an accident, right? And so, no, these are type of rules and regulations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to keep in mind when we're dealing with violence, when people are being violent with one another. How do we maintain justice? How do we maintain good governance? How do we maintain people's wealth and honor and dignity in these situations? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives a number of rules and regulations in that regard. And so fighting, self-defense, how to manage people who are being violent, these are all rules where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us to protect, to safeguard and protect the continuity of life itself. And so from there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He goes even deeper by giving us ways and exposing how we can safeguard peace within our communities. So we're not talking about fighting per se, because fighting is like open enemies, people who are like openly trying to kill you, openly want to remove like your rights, and you're just defending yourself from these people. But then you have the people who claim to be people among you, but then they're insidiously and like secretly trying to undermine you. These aren't people you can necessarily, you can't see them, you don't know what, you can't really fight them per se, because they're not fighting you, right? And so, there's no, the response here isn't appropriate. So here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us regulations as to how to minimize the harm of hypocrites, right? People who are hypocrites, who inwardly they're opponents and they're enemies of you. Outwardly, they're supposed to be your allies and your friends. So this is how you minimize that. First of all, recognize how to avoid becoming one of these people. Right? So you have all of these signs of what these people are like. But then on top of that, how you deal with them once once you see these kind of characteristics, how do you deal with them? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes into quite a bit of detail. Pretty much the rest of this juzah is about that in one shape or form. And there are different ayat, again, that might, go into different directions, but it's all kind of related to this principle. So we're just going to talk about 5 different characteristics that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlights about the hypocrites here. Once they're recognized, then it's easier to maintain peace, which then helps us protect our wealth, helps us protect the guidance, helps us protect our sacred rituals and the sacred sanctity of things, helps us protect the Quran, helps us protect righteous governance, and avoids fighting altogether, right? So one characteristic of the hypocrites is that they make a mockery of religion, right? And so they mock like the religion, they mock the Prophet ﷺ, and they make excessive joking about things that are not to be joked about, right? So they mock the religion, or they downplay serious things in the religion, right? So that's part of desensitizing, because there's no sensitivity. The person who's a hypocrite doesn't have sensitivity in their hearts, right? Because they don't believe in what people are claiming to believe. They're just not admitting it. So because they don't admit it, it comes out in other ways. So mockery and joking and downplaying and belittling serious things in the religion is the way that they kind of indirectly do that. And so making a mockery of religion. And because when you make a mockery of religion, why is that such a serious issue? Because when you make a mockery of religion, you make a mockery of guidance. And when you make a mockery of guidance, the guidance is supposed to protect our wealth, it's supposed to protect our lives, it's supposed to protect, the vulnerable among us. And so now the more we're undermining guidance and undermining and becoming insensitive to important things in religion, the more exposed we are to people doing harm, and no one, or people promoting harm, people promoting misguidance, just blatant misguidance, and people not being sensitive enough to do anything about it, to say anything about it, or to change it. And so that's one characteristic. Another characteristic is this kind of habitual flip-flopping. These people who always flip-flop between belief and disbelief. So, you know, they're with the people who are righteous, and they're not with the people who are righteous, and it's just like back and forth, and you can't really pin them down, right? So the more, but you know, so long as they claim to be with believers, then you have to kind of operate according to what's apparent. You can't open up people's hearts and say this is what you are, and so on and so forth. No, but these are signs to be careful about, you know, for first of all, for our own selves, be careful about beginning to fall into hypocrisy. But then, if we see signs of that in other people, we can start advising them, guiding them, and start, and not to judge them in the sense that, oh, I'm better than you. No, like this is just okay. This is not this is not the right way to do this, right? So let's, you know, so you want to give people advice, and you want to try to guide them away from that because they might not even know that that's what they're doing. And so flip flopping, seeking honor. So on the third one is seeking honor in the authority of unrighteous people. People who are not righteous, people who are vile, people who are immoral, and we seek honor. People who seek honor in being under those people's authority, or people seek honor in people being under their influence, or being connected to them, like and being there, you know, close to them. This is a sign of hypocrisy as well, because now it shows that a person's heart is connected to things that are far from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless of what they're saying and regardless of what they're acting like they're doing. But at the end of the day, they're inclined towards unrighteous people and the authority of unrighteous people. Now, what happens when you fall under the authority of unrighteous people? You fall under misguidance as well, because unrighteous people who are not righteous, they're not interested in justice, not interested in rights, not interested in preserving people's wealth. They're interested in their own egos. And so, you know, so whatever fits the ego at the time, sometimes it can be good, sometimes it can't, but it's got nothing to do with what's good, what's good for humanity, what's good for humanity's relationship with Allah. It's about what's good for them. And so, again, that is a sign of hypocrisy. Another sign of hypocrisy that's mentioned in this juz'a is being opportunistic and switching support when it's convenient. So, you know, when things are going good, you know, wealth is being distributed, and you know your rights are being upheld. Cool, you're good with that. You're with them. But then, as soon as things get a little difficult and some sacrifices are required, all of a sudden you're gone. Now you're with the other side, right? Because the other side has the advantage now. So now we're the other side. Again, this goes back to the flip flopping, but it's a little bit more deeper than that. You know, in terms of like the details of how they do it. And so is, you know, so good, hard times, they're complaining. They're the ones who are saying we shouldn't have done this in the first place. They're the ones who are saying, blaming the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for putting them in this position, blaming Islam, blaming Allah, blaming the decree, blaming the knowledge and the guidance. All of these factors lead them to making excuses for following. Oh, well, see, if I follow this guidance, it's just gonna be hardship, and I'm not supposed to have hardship, and so on and so forth. And then they follow misguidance because it's more convenient at the time. But as soon as that misguidance, and misguidance doesn't last that long before its effects take its toll. As soon as that happens, now they're back on the other bandwagon, and so on and so forth. So this is another element that has to be taken into account. And then being religiously ambiguous. So you're not really dedicated to the religion, right? So you can't really tell where their affiliations lie. You can't really tell where their allegiance lies, their spiritual allegiance lies. And so they're ambiguous. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about these people in various types of details. He gives us different situations, how they will react to those situations. And He gives us signs on how to deal with them. And He also gives us ways to look at repentance. So it's not all bad. A person makes mistakes. They might fall into some form of hypocrisy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَمَن يَكْسِبْ إِثْمًا فَإِنَّمَا يَكْسِبُهُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. Or He says in the ayah right before that, وَمَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا أَوْ يَظْلِمْ نَفْسَهُ ثم يستغفر الله يجد الله غفور رحيما. Whoever does harm, does wrong, and oppresses themselves, and then seeks Allah's forgiveness, then he'll find that Allah is forgiving and merciful. Allah is always going to be forgiving and merciful. Just turn to Him. It's just turn back to Him, ask Allah for forgiveness. No harm done. Now we're moved on to the, now you're back, now you're back in the good graces, and you just go ahead and do good from then on. But on the other hand, on the other hand, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever does wrong, then just know, then that is something that you've done against yourself. So if you don't come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then know Allah is all knowing and all wise. He knows exactly what He's doing. Right? So you need to make sure you know what you're doing by turning back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَن يَكْسِبْ خَطِيئَةً أو إثما ثم يرمي به بريئا فقد احتمل بهتانا وإثما مبينا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever kind of gains a sin, and then just doesn't acknowledge it, right? So now you're in denial. Now you're blaming other people. Now you're putting the sin on someone else, right? You're not acknowledging the sin. This is the opposite of acknowledging it and returning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so these are the type of, this is an example of what we're talking about with regard to the signs of people who inherently have good qualities in them, and they're trying to develop those good qualities, and then other people who are removing themselves from those good qualities, becoming more arrogant and refusing to accept the reality and refusing to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these are the type of people who wind up falling into hypocrisy. And so he goes into different, more descriptions. But he also gives, and this is also one thing that we didn't mention, he talks about women protecting themselves in bad relationships as well in Ayah 128. So giving women the ability to remove themselves from a situation where their rights aren't being upheld. And so similarly, this goes back to the whole idea of safeguarding the oppressed, safeguarding the people who are more naturally in a position where they can be taken advantage of. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts measures in place to where society has to uphold these rights, so long as the other things, as we mentioned, are there. So we have to preserve the guidance so that we can refer back to this when people are being oppressed. We have to preserve wealth. We have to preserve righteous governance. We have to be willing to defend ourselves if someone just doesn't care about freedom of religion or freedom of worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or upholding the guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. So these are the types of things that put together, this is where these are type of societies where the rights of women would be preserved. If we actually go back to the book and we study it and we try to apply it. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we get to the end of the juzah, he says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, kunu qawwamina bil qist. Now that we know, the rights and regulations of people, now that we know, how to safeguard people, now that we know what the truth is, what justice looks like, then we have to stand for fairness. We have to stand for justice. Shuhada alillah, witnesses for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We now bear witness to the justice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, to the fairness Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, and we have to uphold that. Qawwameen. Right? He uses that same word when he talks about Ar-rijalu qawwamuna ala nisa. Men are the maintainers and protectors of women. Similarly, we need to maintain, as humanity in general needs to maintain the fairness and justice in society as a witness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance. وَلَوْ عَلَى أَنفُسِكُمْ, even if that's against ourselves, or even if that's against our parents, or against our families and relatives. Why did he say that? Because those are the hardest people to hold accountable. And so that's where it's especially going to be needed, because it's most difficult to apply. If it never gets applied, then that's where injustice is going to begin to, spread its roots. Injustice spreads roots in the families, and then it goes into society, and so on and so forth. So this is where you get these super families in society that are beyond reproach. No one can say anything about them. No one can do anything about them. Though they're above the law, they can do anything they want to do. That's because you don't hold yourself accountable. You're not able to hold your families accountable. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, he mentions that. And so these are this is the recipe. And throughout the juz, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically gives us the recipe for how to be successful in safeguarding our community from all the factors that we have to take into account from within, whether that's wealth, protecting and safeguarding the wealth of women, of children, protecting our minds, protecting the guidance, protecting the Quran, protecting our sacred spaces, protecting our lives, and minimizing the harm that is produced by hypocrites within. And if we're able to do that, inshallah, we will be able to succeed and move on with making sure that we are able to apply this guidance correctly. And inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will show us more ways that we apply this guidance correctly now that we know how to safeguard the community in general. And inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to safeguard the community, to continue to protect us, and to allow us to keep making these connections and to read the Quran and open our hearts, unlock the meanings of the Quran, and see the connection between different ajza and between different surahs and between different ayats. So, jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.